The video you are about to see is about the NSP program, an innovative housing program created by emergency congressional legislation, custom designed by the City of Hammond to help address the unprecedented subprime foreclosures in much of the nation. But in order to better understand how this program came about, let's go back to the summer of 2008. In response to the 2007-2008 subprime mortgage crisis, and because of the onslaught of foreclosures and the ensuing economic recession occurring all over America, Congress quickly passed emergency legislation titled the Housing and Economic Recovery Act of 2008, signed by President Bush on July of 2008. One key component of this legislation was the Neighborhood Stabilization Program, or NSP, technically a substantial amendment to the Community Development Block Grant Program. Under this legislation, Congress allocated $3.92 billion for the purpose of issuing entitlements to public jurisdictions that qualified under a funding formula. The funding formula required that these funds be made available to states and units of local government with the greatest need as determined by the Secretary of HUD. Through this formula, the City of Hammond received an allocation of $3,860,473. Now comes the fun part. How are these dollars to be used? Public jurisdictions are allowed to use these dollars to primarily acquire and rehabilitate abandoned and/or foreclosed properties. Also, one major change to the historically low to moderate income CDBG program was that under NSP, a purchasing household could have a household income of up to 120% of the area median income, or AMI. Therefore, for the first time since the creation of the Community Development Block Grant Act, a household does not have to be low to moderate income to be eligible to purchase an NSP program property. Furthermore, for the less fortunate households that are 50% or less of the area median income, the legislation targeted at least 25% of the public jurisdiction's allocation must be used to benefit that sector of our population. Under the guidance and leadership of Mayor Thomas M. McDermott, Jr., he directed his Department of Planning and Development staff to move forward to get its eligible entitlement. The city had to prepare a substantial amendment to its HUD-required consolidation plan, which had to meet all the regulatory requirements. The substantial amendment was submitted as required, with the approval coming in 2009. Because of the current mortgage financing mechanisms, mortgages are often sold to numerous investors with hired servicing agents. It became a Herculean task to identify the actual title holders of these properties in the nation's cities. In order to address this identification problem, the City of Hammond identified a large national not-for-profit, the National Community Stabilization Trust, under the guidance of former HUD Undersecretary Craig Nickerson, that is working with the nation's largest financial institutions and local housing providers across the U.S. to reclaim neighborhoods hard hit by high levels of foreclosure and abandonment. NCST created a bridge between financial institutions and local housing providers across the country. The Stabilization Trust provided the only nationwide platform that gives local housing providers a clear and consistent and straight path to acquired, foreclosed, and abandoned properties from financial institutions. Under the leadership of NSP Home Manager Dennis Radowski and his consulting partner, NSP Consultants, Hammond was one of NCST's premier partners. Under the HUD statutory 18-month timeline, the city proceeded in acquiring all the properties it could with its federal allocation. Presently, there are 40 homes throughout the city and counting that have been acquired under the NSP program in the City of Hammond. Because of the success of the NSP program and the continuing foreclosure crisis, in 2010, Congress passed the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act, which allocated $1 billion to an NSP3 program, which under the formula, Hammond is eligible for $1,243,934. The NSP 3 program has had some reduction in its eligible use and requires a public jurisdiction to select a very limited target area. Property acquisition will begin shortly for these properties in the South Hammond targeted area. Be on the lookout for further information on this program and its corresponding properties. What makes the NSP program such a valuable tool besides the initial acquisition and rehabilitation of abandoned and foreclosed property is that it allows public jurisdictions the ability to recapture the dollars at a sale that can only be used for the same purpose of buying and rehabilitating NSP eligible properties. As a final point, under the original legislation, the city will be able to recycle these dollars through July 30th of 2013. This will potentially allow the city to acquire and rehabilitate from 100 to 200 abandoned foreclosed homes and place them back on the tax rolls as performing assets for the community. As was mentioned earlier, there are regulatory guidelines to what is to be done to these properties to get them back into the market. Properties must go through an environmental review. The review includes lead-based paint, asbestos, and mold assessment, with a final review by the city planner. The city must follow the procedures for a Section 106 historic review. During this process, the city's construction management team, NSP Consultants, conducts initial reviews of the property to determine the property's potential eligibility, and then the city decides whether or not to buy the property. Once the property has been acquired by the city, NSP Consultants Associates go into full force to bring the property up to the HUD-approved rehabilitation standards and applicable codes. The process typically includes the writing of the lead-based paint abatement specification for licensed abatement contractors, and then a full work write-up specification for the general contractors to bring the property up to current applicable codes. NSP Consultants Inspectors are graduates of Purdue University's Department of Construction Sciences and Organizational Leadership and have recently received additional training in the new International Energy Efficiency Code and the International Existing Building Code. Once the two sets of work write-ups and cost estimates are written, qualified general contractors are notified to pick up bid packages and submit their bids for review and awards. Once the lead-based paint abatement contractor completes his work, the home is lead-free or stabilized, which makes for a much safer condition for the general contractor staff and the future homeowner. All general contractor workers are required by the 2009 EPA law to have their employees pass a lead-based paint renovator course. Once the contracts are all signed and the abatement contractor has completed his work, the general contractor begins his or her work. The scope will typically replace and or update mechanical systems, and all bathrooms and kitchens receive a complete makeover, with all bedrooms, living rooms, and dining rooms receiving wall and floor treatments so that the units are like new. The work by the general contractor is typically completed within 60 to 90 days, and the house is then basically ready for sale. Because of the city's flexibility under the federal regulations for the NSP program, the city does have the ability to subsidize the sale price so that it is affordable and often comparable to neighborhood sale prices, but with virtually a new home. While the NSP program is only a small part of the overall answer to foreclosed and abandoned properties, it is a very important tool to help address these community eyesores. In the final analysis, the goal of the NSP program is to stabilize the values of existing property and help America process its foreclosure housing. So somewhere down the line, the housing market will bottom out, and where traditional market forces and not the wild and crazy world of uncontrolled speculation will be the norm. We believe with numerous innovative fiscal and administrative policies created by the administration of Mayor McDermott, Hammond will continue to be a city on the vanguard of overall good housing policy here in Northwest Indiana.